Well, hello. We're about to an election where it looks fairly likely that we're going to get rid of the false idol created by a political movement, a fascist political movement here in the United States that demands and requires a leader, a messiah. I mean, that's the issue behind Trump, is not that there's something weirdly special about his odd blend of skills and lack thereof. It's not that he's something uniquely wonderful. It's just there was a movement looking for someone to fill a slot. That movement requires a leader figure, and he filled the gap. If he hadn't come along, I'm afraid someone else would have, and someone else will again. This is something we've talked about before. The desire for a leader. Certain political movements are built around the concept that there's a leader, a messiah. There has to, and they will find one. They will create. But I am concerned that most of us seem to feel we need a leader. And we're about to come to an election where some people, not quite as far left as me, but on what is considered the far left extreme of American political spectrum, are saying, oh, Biden, so what? He's no good. He's not that much better than Trump. This false equivalence between someone who eats broken glass and someone who probably doesn't have the best diet. I mean, no, Joe Biden is nothing special. He's just yet another middle of the road American politician. What a wonderful change that is from Satan incarnate, you know? But of course, without Trump, we still have the Trump movement, that the fascist movement looks for a leader. And we still have our own need for leaders. And this creates a real confusion in many good-hearted people on the left. They're saying, if I can't have someone who does all the good stuff, I don't want anybody. And this leads back to something, to a book that I've reread most recently by someone who, a great figure, one of the great figures of socialist thought, Rosa Luxemburg. Of course, she was not only a Marxist, but a critic of Lenin from the left. And she criticized Lenin's belief that the people, the working class, the people generally, needed a vanguard party to stand in for them. She calls it substitutionism. I just call it the vanguard. There's somebody who can speak for you. This is a form of desire for a leader, a messiah. Instead of maybe one single leader, there's the messiah movement. There's the in the know people, and we need those leaders. But her most famous book is called Reform. Well, not book. Her most famous writing, which is contained in this book, which is named after that writing. Her most famous article was called Reform or Revolution. Of course, she came down on the side of revolution. And you say, what does that have to do with my theme of leadership and the fact that we don't need it? Well, first, why is it a disjunct? Why is it or? Why isn't it reform and revolution? The problem with reform, of course, is that it leads you to compromise and come up quite short of your goals. There's only so much reform can accomplish. But the problem with only revolution is it allows you to sit on your hands and allow things to get worse and worse and worse, and just say, well, that's all right. We're building up the contradictions that will lead to the big boom someday. putting aside what people mean by revolution, I'm not, I am much less optimistic about any potential value of destructive behavior and violence than other. I I won't. I'm not on the far extreme that says violence has never accomplished anything, because that would be empirically unsound to say. But I certainly don't think it's the way to whatever we mean by the revolution. But why reform or revolution leads to complacency, really, by the revolutionist who says, well, who cares? Let things get worse. We can't fix it until there's the revolution someday. And it leads to very low goals by the reformist. He says, well, we'll take what we can get. I say, why not both at the same time? And on the reform side, well, that's why we vote. And that's why we vote for someone like Joe Biden, who isn't going to do what I want him to do. But he's basically a decent human being with, his mind has been captured by the hegemony of standard orthodox thinking about the economy, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, I don't think he's a genius. I don't think he's flawless on a personal moral level. And I certainly think his mind is very closed to true possibility. I mean, yeah, he's standard issue, middle of the road Democrat. But he's a step in the direction of reform. And we vote for that. We vote and stay inside the system to make what changes can be made there. And in addition to short-term improvement of all of our lives, and none of us are going to live forever, and revolution someday isn't going to do much good to someone who's going to die in the next few years. And along with short-term improvement, reform creates more space for a wider variety of ideas and approaches. In other words, reform creates space for revolution. Now, you may say reform inoculates society against the need for revolution. I don't think so. I don't think so. I think it may inoculate society against one version of what we mean by revolution, the more destructive and perhaps violent kind. May well indeed stave that off somewhat. But is revolution simply a synonym for war? Or is revolution a word that means a big revolving of the way our world works? It's not reform or revolution. It's reform and revolution at the same time. You work inside and you work outside. You do both. Now, if you're going to be an elected official, you're on the reform side, you're out of the revolution game. You can't lead the revolution. Nobody who is an elected official is going to lead the revolution. But we don't need leaders. That's the big myth. There are no leaders. The people we elect are followers. They follow the trend. We make a big category mistake when we assign the name leader to those people. We should call them followers. We should call them what they are, public employees, and realize that we lead them. They don't lead us. You all know the famous story where Lyndon Johnson met with Martin Luther King Jr. and said, I want to pass the Civil Rights Act. Now you go out and make me do it. Go out to the streets and make me do it. Now see that? It's reform and revolution. They come together. Not the same people can do both. I mean, if you are going to pick the route of being an elected official, you're on the reform side. But you can at least hope to see other people leading the revolution. I think, for instance, Alexandria Ortiz-Cortez has chosen to be on the reform side, which is great. And I think in her heart, she is saying, go, go, go to the revolution side. And let her do her work. It's very important. She's not only making the world a little bit better as it goes, but also creating space for those on the outside to do their. But we all need to pitch in and do our part. Forget about leaders. There aren't. Okay? Let that go. End of story.